gory one, the disappearance. 5 years ago, in our quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood, our neighbor Charles's 14-year-old son Ethan vanished without a trace. The police swarmed the area, and Ethan's face was everywhere on the news. My wife Karen and I felt devastated for Charles and his wife Kathy. We offered our help and support, but as the years dragged on with no word, Charles and Kathy seemed to sink into a quiet despair. Charles grew increasingly nervous and awkward, while Kathy became almost a ghost of her former. Last week, just as dusk settled, Charles knocked on our door. "Hey, Tom, can I borrow your shovel? Need to do some work in the backyard," he said, his voice shaky. Without hesitation, I handed him my best shovel. From my upstairs window later that evening, I watched him struggling to dig a large hole in his backyard. Curious, I grabbed my second shovel and headed over. "Need a hand, Charles?" I called out. He looked up, startled. No, Tom, please. Just go back inside," he stammered, almost panicking. "I got this. Please just leave." Confused and a bit offended, I backed off and went inside. Later that night, around 1:30 a.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of a shovel hitting dirt. I snuck out quietly, peering over the fence. In the dim moonlight, I saw Charles digging again, frantically. I noticed a black garbage bag partially buried in the hole. My heart raced. Before I could decide whether to investigate further, Charles went inside. I seized the moment, quickly checking the hole. The bag felt heavy and ominous, and I fled back to my house. The next morning, the hole was filled in, and Charles's SUV was parked on the street instead of his driveway. A chilling realization struck me. Charles might have dug up his son's body to dispose of it elsewhere. Ever since that night, he has avoided me, and now I often catch him staring at me from his window, his gaze full of suspicion and something darker. I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do. Story 2. The Boys Next Door. I was 15 when we lived in our first house on Cedar Lane. Next door were two boys, Eric and Todd. Despite being neighbors for years, we rarely interacted. One afternoon, while my younger brother Jake and I were playing basketball in the driveway, Todd approached us. "Hey, you guys moving soon?" Todd asked, kicking the dirt casually. "Yeah, in a few months," I replied, trying to be polite. "Cool. Wanna come with us to shoot BB guns by the river tomorrow?" Todd invited, a strange glint in his eye. The next day, Jake and I met Todd and Eric in their backyard. They were dressed in camo gear, carrying a duffel bag. As we walked down the road towards the woods, their silence was eerie. When we reached the river, Todd unzipped the bag and pulled out real guns. "Here!" Todd handed us the guns. "These aren't BB guns. They're the real deal." "What?" I gasped, my heart pounding. "No way. We're not comfortable with this." Eric loaded a gun and fired at a tree across the river. "Just relax," he said, smirking. I grabbed the gun from Jake and placed them both back in the bag. "We're leaving, now." As we walked away, one of the boys yelled a curse at us. That night, I woke to find my window wide open. I felt a cold metal press against my head and heard Todd's whisper. "If you tell anyone about the guns, you and your family." I stayed still, whispering, "Okay, I won't." He pushed my head hard before leaving through the window. For months, either Todd or Eric would watch us from their house, their eyes always on me or Jake. One night, a rock hit my window at 1 a.m. I opened it to see Todd aiming a pistol at me. As our moving day approached, their harassment intensified. I was relieved when we finally moved, but the memory of their threats still haunts me. The deranged neighbor. Fresh out of college, I moved into a rundown house on Elm Street, the only place I could afford. The neighborhood was rough, and my neighbors were unsettling. On one side was a family that always blasted loud music. On the other side were two women, one in her 60s and another slightly younger with severe mental disabilities. The older woman was cold and distant, while the younger woman often had violent episodes. One evening, as I sat on my porch, I watched the younger woman rocking back and forth, screaming as the older woman tried to calm her. She pointed at me, mumbling incoherently. Unnerved, I went inside. Later that night, their screams grew louder. I couldn't sleep, so I went over and banged on their door. The older woman answered, "What do you want?" She snapped. "Can you please keep the noise down?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She raised her eyebrows, clearly annoyed. Just then, the younger woman screamed, "How dare you!" and tried to lunge at me. The older woman held her back and slammed the door in my face. I returned to bed, but their noise had finally stopped. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint noise from downstairs. I dismissed it and went back to sleep, only to be woken again 20 minutes later. This time, I heard a soft shuffling from my room. Using my phone as a light, I looked around. To my horror, the deranged woman was crouched at the foot of my bed. She screamed like a banshee when the light hit her face. I bolted from my bed, tripping and scrambling towards the door. I looked back to see her following me, her eyes wild. I slammed the door behind me and ran downstairs, locking the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops, explaining the situation as she pounded on the door, screaming incoherently. The police arrived, taking her away for the night. The older woman pleaded with them, but they insisted. One officer asked if I wanted to press charges. Shaking, I declined, but the terror of that night left me scarred. My neighbors weren't just strange, they were dangerously unstable. Story 4. It was a crisp autumn evening in Willow Creek, Oregon. and the leaves had just begun to turn shades of red and gold. I had recently moved into an old Victorian house at the end of Maple Street. The house was a fixer-upper, but I loved its charm and potential. The neighborhood seemed quiet and friendly, though I hadn't met many of my neighbors yet. That changed when I met Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson lived next door in a house that was nearly identical to mine, though much better maintained. He was an elderly man with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said when we first met. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." A few weeks after moving in, I noticed Mr. Thompson spending a lot of time in his basement. The windows were small and high up, but I could sometimes see a faint light flickering through them at odd hours of the night. At first I didn't think much of it, figuring he was probably working on a hobby. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to tackle the overgrown backyard. As I was pulling weeds near the fence that separated our properties, I heard a strange noise coming from Mr. Thompson's basement. It sounded like a faint, rhythmic tapping. Curious, I moved closer to the fence and listened. The tapping continued, steady and persistent. Then suddenly it stopped. To my gardening, but that night I was awoken by the same tapping sound. It was louder now, more insistent. I looked at the clock. 17 a.m. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly made my way outside. I crept along the side of my house and peered over the fence. The light was on in Mr. Thompson's basement, and the tapping was louder than ever. I could see shadows moving inside, distorted by the small, dusty windows. Mustering my courage, I decided to go over and check on him. I knocked on his front door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I walked around to the side of the house and found the basement door. It was slightly ajar. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Should I go in? What if something was wrong? Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The basement was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was musty, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "Mr. Thompson?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you down here?" There was no response. I took a few cautious steps forward, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and tools. In the far corner, I noticed a large wooden crate with a heavy padlock. As I approached the crate, I felt a cold draft brush against my skin. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. I reached out to touch the padlock when suddenly I heard a whisper. "Help me." I froze. The voice was faint, almost inaudible, but it was there. I looked around, my flashlight beam shaking. "Mr. Thompson?" I whispered back. "Please, help me." The voice was coming from inside the crate. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the padlock. It was old and rusty, but eventually I managed to open it. I lifted the lid, and my flashlight illuminated the contents. Inside the crate was a small makeshift bed, and lying on it was a frail, emaciated figure. It was a young woman, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Please, help me," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my God," I gasped. "What happened to you?" Before she could answer, I heard the basement door creak open. I spun around to see Mr. Thompson standing there, a menacing look on his face. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled, stepping forward. I backed away, my heart racing. "What are you doing? Why is she here?" "She's none of your business," he snapped. "Get out now." I glanced back at the woman in the crate. She was too weak to move, her eyes pleading with me to do something. Summoning all my courage, I shouted, "No, I'm calling the police." Mr. Thompson lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. 911, what's your emergency? "There's a woman trapped in my neighbor's basement. He's holding her against her will. Please hurry." The police arrived within minutes. They stormed Mr. Thompson's house and rescued the woman. She was taken to the hospital, and Mr. Thompson was arrested. I later learned that she had been missing for over a year, and Mr. Thompson had been keeping her prisoner in his basement. The neighborhood was shocked. No one could believe that the kind, elderly Mr. Thompson was capable of such a monstrous act. As for me, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The sound of the tapping, the look in the woman's eyes, and the sheer terror of discovering the truth about my seemingly friendly neighbor.